Welcome to my sewing room. I'm Claudia Lash, and my sewing room isn't terribly big. So I have my twirls quilt hanging on the front of the closet because my wall's kind of full now. This is the quilt that I am using right now for the next several weeks to focus on sewing some elementary kind of blocks. And the first block that we started with already is what I call the twirls block. This is the twirls block right here. It's a nice square block it looks to me like it's twirling around. In this quilt, there are several twirls blocks. And so I already did a short video on making the twirls block. And in that video, we talked about learning to make flying geese 4 at a time. We learned to do some elementary cutting. We also focused a little bit on the stitch and flip type of method when you're just adding corners to a block and not having to fancy cut to make those corners. So we've done the twirls block, and now the next thing we're going to focus on is this block right here. This is what I call a zigzag block. It's not a square, instead it's a rectangle, and it involves having maybe a background and then the two outer parts of the zigzag and the middle section of the zigzag. So in the video today, we're going to learn to cut those strips to make that zigzag and how to make that block. Now, if you would like to follow along, if you'd like to have a printed pattern, there's one on my website right now. It's called Twirls, and it's at a discounted price. You can get a PDF that's downloadable. I think it's $8, so it's quite a bargain right now. And you can follow along with that. It has the directions and a lot of pictures and everything. The other thing I like about this quilt is it has a lot of possibilities for making it your own. Okay, I have my fabrics on my cutting table. I am ready to cut the pieces for the zigzag block. For the zigzag block, you need a background. This is my background, white. You also need 2 strips of a color for the outside and 1 strip for the inside of the zigzag. I thought these 2 blues worked nicely together, and so I'm putting this dark blue on the outside. This will be on the inside, and I've already cut the background. The background fabric only needs you to cut a square and then cut the square in half so that you have 2 triangles like this. Cut it diagonally in half so that you end up with 2 triangles. I've already cut those. Those are pretty easy to cut, and really cutting strips is not too hard. You were supposed to cut the strips by the width of fabric, so I laid my fabric out, and must be where I cut it from, and I just cut. I only wanted to cut 1 to start us out. So I did that one, and then I started to cut the other fabric for the one where I need 2 strips. And I stopped because I noticed myself doing something that I often do. And that is, I have this big hunk of fabric. I only need to cut 2, for right now, to show you, 2 strips that I think are 2 inches each. And they are with the fabric. So rather than try to cut it from the edge, you never know how straight your edge is going to be. But I took my fabric and I cut. Here's the way it looked when I had it. This was the rough edge when I folded it over. I knew that I needed to have 2 strips, that each strip is 2 inches wide. So what do I need? But I need 4 inches. So I laid my ruler on this fabric and I cut 4 inches, at least 4 inches wide here. If I can show you. So I laid my ruler here and I cut this right here so that I have, in fact, I have, looks like almost 5 inches, but I usually just make sure that I have at least 4. I usually want a little bit extra in case, in case it's rough on the edge. Once I cut that a little bigger than I need, then I take this and I flip it around, and I'm going to lay it a little crooked so I can put my ruler on here. And then now I need 4 inches. And in a previous, I think in a previous video, I already mentioned that if you lay your ruler on top of your fabric, that fabric underneath there is nice and steady. It's not going to get whippered, just all messed up. So leave it on top. I've got 4 inches underneath here. I'm going to cut off this extra. Well, this is kind of a lot to cut off, but I did. Now I've cut off that, and now I need 2 strips, 2 inches each. So I'm going to just pick the ruler up, go to right here. I'm going to lay it down at the 2-inch line. This should be 2 inches also. So I'm going to cut right here. Now I have 2 2-inch strips. And I have my other strip for the center. So, okay, I'm going to sew a dark strip to my center strip, right sides together. I'm going to make a nice 1/4 inch seam right here, and then I'm going to sew this dark strip to the other side of the stripe until I have a strip, 3 different strips together, and I'm going to press them all in one direction. I'll show you that in a minute. I have my 3 strips sewn together, and I have pressed the seams all going the same direction. And if I were really doing this, what I suggest in the pattern is that you take 2 strip sets together and cut them so that you have cut them so that they are right sides together, but have them switched around so that the seams are going the opposite directions, and then they lay very nicely. Well, I don't really need to cut that many today, so I am just going to cut 1 at a time, and that will be fine. That will be fine. What we do then is, in order to cut, we need to have a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to find the 45-degree angle on a ruler. I have this nice big square ruler, which will work. I'm going to lay the 45-degree line along the bottom, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter and go there. You do not have to have this big of a ruler. If you have a ruler like this that has a 45, you could lay that down and cut that 45 too. I'm just doing it. You could use any ruler. I think this one might be a little bit small because it doesn't reach all the way up to the end, but you could probably get by with that. So lay the 45-degree line right there at the bottom, and then I'm going to hold this carefully. I don't want this to wiggle around, and I am going to just cut. And if you're doing it for yourself, it would be best again if you have 2 together, so that you have one facing one way, one facing the other. All right, so we have this. Now we're going to pick up this ruler, take that one out. I'm going to lay a ruler right next door, right along this line. And I might still, if I had a 45-degree line to make sure, I would lay it right there. I can't see my 45-degree line right now because it's way down here, but okay, lay your one ruler. This is 6.5. I'm laying it on that line. And then I am going to take another ruler and lay that here. Now, this time I can probably check the 45. This is lined up on the edge. Here, my 45 is lined up at the bottom again. And I'm going to pick this ruler up. It's a 6.5, not a 6. And I'm going to cut right like that. I have my section. Then I'm going to pull this down. And I'm going to do the same thing again. Lay this one on here, right on the edge. And if I lay this other ruler right next to it, and don't move this guy. This is a handy way to use 2 rulers at one time. Lay the 45. This should be lined up. This should be lined up. And then remove one ruler and cut again. And you're going to keep doing that all the way down your strips until you have, if you do them back to back, or you should have one going one way and one going the other way. So we'd have 2 here and 2 here. I'm going to do mine a little different because of I'm not wanting to cut all of that. So I'm going to flip mine upside down and do kind of be a little bit wasteful, I think. But I want to do one of the going the other direction. I just didn't want to have to make as many strips as you need for this whole pattern, just to show you. So I'm going to do this now this way. I'm going to cut this away. I flipped them upside down. And now I can make a strip going the other direction. Again, you have to have a 6.5 inch wide ruler. And find the 45. And if it starts to get off, then you're going to get him back lined up. The main thing is that, see how this got off a little bit? So I'm going to, I think it's more important that we get that 45 right. So maybe I'm going to, I think it's going to be more important that I get this trimmed up a little bit. Okay, slide off a little tiny bit, and then cut this. So now, and if you do them together, it's saved a little bit. Now you see we have one going one direction and one going the other direction. And that's what you're going to need so that you can put them together and have them doing something like that. Okay, but before we can do any more, we need to add on the white sections, or the background sections. So, this is the right side. We're going to lay on one triangle right here, just right in the middle. And I probably will pin this. Yep, I'm pretty sure I will pin this so that I don't scoot him down a little bit more each time. And then I'm going to lay on one right sides together on the other side, pin, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch right down here, and then pin this one on the other long edge so that we end up with something kind of like that when we're done sewing. And then we'll check that. Okay, I have my strip, and I've already added one corner triangle to the side. And I wanted you to notice, so I've already sewn that one, but I wanted you to notice I have pinned on the white triangle, and I pinned it so that there's at least a healthy quarter sticking out on the one end. On the other end, there still seems to be a little space, but that's okay. I did pin it on the blue side, well, on the strips side, so that I can sew it on the strip side a nice 1/4 inch down here. The white fabric side, or the triangle side, is bias. When you are sewing a straight grain of fabric side, a piece, to a bias piece, it's always helpful to sew on the grain of fabric, the one that's non-bias, because sewing on the bias side, it will tend, even though you try your hardest, sometimes it tends to pull this bias piece and stretch it out. So remember that. Stitch on this side, the strip side, and then we'll press. Okay, I've sewn both of the triangles on, and in the directions it says to press the seams in the same direction as these seams are. So these seams are going towards that way. I'm going to press both of these seams in that same direction. And once I press them, then we will trim the block. Okay, I have my block sewn, and I am going to trim it now. For me, it was easier to use this 6.5 by 24.5 or whatever ruler. So I laid it down. This block you don't trim off a whole lot like you might in some blocks. But instead, we want it to be 6.5 by 12.5. So 6.5, look, it's just about there, except for a couple of dog ears up there. But I put the 6 1/4 line, which I'm looking at right there, I put that in the middle of the block. Here's where 12.5 is. Here's where the edge is over here. So I'm going to scoot that down so that the 6.5 line is right there. And over here, it's right there. I'm going to line this up on the block. We're very close. I don't think I need to trim too much off of either end. And I'm just mainly going to trim this side. Whoops, trim. I'm going to trim that and that. And then I'm going to flip him around. And now I think I should be able to lay my 12.5 line right there. Have it all lined up in the middle. The 6 1/4 line should be about in the same spot there. And we're going to trim off the other side at 12.5. So there you go. Now then, you will have one that goes one way. Well, you'll have 6, I think, that go like one way, and then 6 that go the other way, so that when you put them together in the final piece, let's see, here's one that goes the other direction. Notice how these seams are going that way, these seams are going the other way. Whoops, wait a minute. Let me flip this around then so that I know that this will work. Okay, so that eventually when you sew the rows together, you're going to have to sew these together. If these seams are going opposite directions, they will be easy to match up so that you have a zigzag block, or a zigzag section. How's that?